picture this. You're standing on the very edge of the world. The wind's whipping at your face,
Yeah.
and, with every fiber of your being, that the very next step you take could be your last.
Yeah.
That's the reality that George Mallory and Sandy Irvine faced back in 1924
Wow.
when they tried to conquer Mount Everest, a mountain that had already claimed so many lives before them. It's a puzzle, isn't it?
It really is a true mystery, just shrouded in ice and snow. And today we're going to try to unpack it bit by bit.
What's so captivating about this story, though, is that
Yeah.
it's more than just about two guys trying to climb a mountain,
I
right?
think absolutely.
It's about pushing the limits of what we're capable of as humans.
Yeah.
It's about the allure of the unknown. And, of course, that nagging question, did they actually make it to the top?
Exactly. And what's amazing is we have all these pieces of the puzzle to work with Diary's firsthand accounts, even the, kind of haunting discovery of Mallory's body all these years later.
Right.
And they all paint this incredible picture of an expedition that really pushed the boundaries of human achievement.
Right. You mentioned that allure of the unknown. What was it about Everest in particular that so captured the world's imagination back then in the early 20th century?
Well, you've got to remember the context. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were a time of, really intense nationalism.
Yeah.
And conquering these uncharted territories, whether it was the poles or the highest mountains, it became like a symbol of national pride almost, a way for countries to flex their muscles on the world stage. And for the British, especially after, missing out on the South Pole, Everest became like this ultimate prize, this embodiment of what the empire could achieve.
So it was never just about the climb itself. There was this whole other geopolitical layer to it all.
Exactly.
But where does George Mallory fit into all of this? Who was this guy who dared to challenge the mountain?
Mallory's a fascinating character. He was a school teacher, a devoted dad, but also this incredibly driven climber who had already attempted Everest twice before. He had this charisma, this passion, and he was really deeply affected by his experiences in World War I. The war really exposed him to unimaginable loss and suffering.
Right.
And some people believe that it was actually the war that fueled his desire to conquer Everest, to find some kind of meaning, in a world that had been so shattered by conflict.
It's like Everest almost became this symbolic battle for him. His wartime experiences, the loss, the search for purpose.
Absolutely.
What was it like for those early expeditions, though?
Oh, man.
It's mind-boggling to even think about attempting Everest with the equipment they had back then.
It's hard to fathom, right? They were dealing with completely different circumstances. No high-tech gear, no fancy weather forecasting, not even the understanding of altitude sickness that we have today.
Wow.
They were literally facing the raw power of nature with like the most basic tools imaginable.
Just relying on pure strength, willpower, and a little bit of luck, I guess.
Pretty much.
And wasn't there also this whole debate swirling around the use of oxygen back then?
Oh,
I mean, it seems almost counterintuitive to reject oxygen when you're trying to climb the highest mountain in the world.
you'd think so, right? But back then there was this idea that using supplemental oxygen was somehow like cheating, that it diminished the purity of the climb. Mallory himself even initially rejected the idea, but later on he came to understand that it was just essential for survival at those extreme altitudes.
It makes you wonder if his initial reluctance played any part in what happened.
It's hard to say for sure, but the 1922 expedition really brought the dangers of Everest into sharp focus. When 7 porters tragically died in an avalanche,
Right.
it forced everyone to confront the brutal reality of what they were dealing with.
I bet. That must have been a devastating blow to the entire team. Did that make Mallory reconsider his own ambitions at all?
While the loss of life was obviously deeply felt, it seems that Mallory's determination actually intensified.
Really?
Yeah, some would argue that this almost obsessive need to conquer Everest may have clouded his judgment in the end and possibly contributed to his fate.
So in 1924, he sets off on his third attempt this time, partnering with a young climber named Sandy Irvine. What can you tell us about him? He always seems to get a little overshadowed by Mallory in the telling of this story.
Irvine is a fascinating piece of the puzzle. He was brilliant, technically gifted, and incredibly strong, all essential qualities for what they were facing ahead.
Yeah.
He was chosen not just for his climbing skills, but also for his expertise with the oxygen apparatus, which was pretty revolutionary at the time.
It's incredible to think that at just 22 years old, He was thrust into this high-stakes expedition with the weight of the world on his shoulders.
I know, right? It makes you wonder what must have been going through his mind as they set off on that final climb.
What do we actually know about what happened on June 8th, 1924, the day they disappeared?
Well, it was a day filled with challenges from the very start. They were already behind schedule, facing deteriorating weather. But they pressed on anyway.
They were determined.
Oh, yeah. The last confirmed sighting of them was by a fellow climber named Noel Odell. He spotted them high on the mountain, potentially somewhere near the second step, which is notoriously difficult, but his account's not entirely reliable because the visibility was so poor.
Right.
And after that, they just vanished into the clouds.
Leaving behind a mystery that has lingered for a century.
Exactly. It's amazing to think that for decades, their fate was just shrouded in mystery,
Right.
fueling all kinds of speculation. Was it a fall? Did the weather get them? Did they make it to the top only to, perish on the way back down?
So many unanswered questions.
Exactly. And then in 1999, 75 years later, a discovery on the mountain finally shed some light on this enduring enigma.
75 years.
Yeah.
Wow. What happened?
An expedition led by Conrad Anker stumbled upon a body just frozen in time lying face down on the north face.
Oh, wow.
It was George Mallory.
I can't even imagine what that must have been like for them to
Right.
find him after all those years. What was the reaction?
Jake Norton, one of the climbers on the expedition, he described it as this incredibly profound experience.
I bet.
He talked about the eerie stillness of the death zone and the feeling of stepping back in time. It was like they were witnessing the final resting place of a legend.
It's almost like Mallory's body became this time capsule holding clues to what happened that day.
Yeah.
So what could they learn from examining his remains?
Well, the body itself told a story of a desperate struggle. There was this severe rope jerk injury around his waist, suggesting he'd fallen from a significant height.
Oh, wow.
His right leg was broken, and there were signs of a head injury, possibly from a falling rock.
It's amazing how much information they could glean from the body after all this time.
It is. But there was one crucial piece of equipment missing: the oxygen apparatus.
The oxygen apparatus, that's huge. Doesn't that suggest that maybe they summited and got rid of it on the way down to lighten their load? Or could there be another explanation?
That's the million-dollar question, right? Some experts think that the missing oxygen apparatus actually supports the summit theory. The thinking is that maybe they reached the top, ditched the heavy equipment to make the descent easier, and then ran into some unforeseen trouble.
But couldn't they have also just run out of oxygen before even reaching the summit and discarded it in a moment of desperation?
That's definitely another possibility.
Yeah,
The evidence is open to interpretation, and there's no definitive answer.
of course.
But it's those little details, the position of his body, the injuries, the missing oxygen, that fuel the debate about whether they actually made it or not.
Right. And then there's the whole mystery of the missing camera.
Ah, yes, the camera. It was a Kodak Vest pocket camera, and if it's ever found, it could hold the answer to this century-old question.
Wow.
If the film is still intact and can be developed, we might finally see images from the summit, proof that they achieved their goal.
It's incredible to think that somewhere up there on that mountain could be a camera that could rewrite history.
Yeah.
Did they find anything else on Mallory's body that could help solve this puzzle?
They did. In his pockets, they found letters from his wife, a bill, and a small penknife. But perhaps the most poignant discovery was a photograph of his wife, Ruth. He'd promised to leave it on the summit, and he
Wow.
carried it with him close to his heart, even in those final moments.
It's just a reminder that these weren't just, figures in a history book. They were real people with families, dreams, aspirations.
Absolutely. Their stories are human stories.
So let's get back to the evidence for a moment. We've talked about the injuries, the missing oxygen, the camera. Is there anything else that points towards a summit or a fall during the descent?
Well, there's the fact that Mallory's body was found relatively high on the mountain, at an altitude of 8,155 meters.
Okay.
This suggests that they'd made significant progress and were likely descending from the upper slopes when the accident happened.
So if they were descending, does that mean they'd already summited? Or could they have turned back before reaching the top?
It's impossible to know for sure. Some argue that the location of his body combined with the missing oxygen suggests they reached the summit and were on their way down. Others say that the terrain where he was found is incredibly dangerous even on the descent. So a fall could have happened at any point.
It's like trying to piece together a puzzle with half the pieces missing.
Exactly.
We have these tantalizing clues, but the full picture remains elusive.
Wow.
So what does Jake Norton, the climber who found Mallory, think happened?
Norton believes it's entirely possible that they reached the summit. He points to the fact that Mallory's goggles were found in his pocket,
Interesting.
suggesting he might have put them away after reaching the top as the sun started to set.
Yeah, you wouldn't need goggles in the dark on the descent. But if they did summit, why descend in darkness?
Right.
That seems incredibly risky even for seasoned climbers.
It's a question that has baffled many. Maybe they felt a sense of urgency to get back down to a lower altitude before the weather took a turn for the worse. Or perhaps after all those years of dreaming and striving, the euphoria of reaching the summit clouded their judgment.
Almost like their ambition.
Yeah.
The very force that drove them to the top might have also sealed their fate. Yeah, it really is a tragic irony, isn't it?
Yeah.
The very same drive that pushed them to such heights might have also been what led to their demise.
Yeah, it really speaks to that complex nature of human ambition, doesn't it? That fine line between determination and recklessness. We see this theme throughout history in explorers, adventurers, anyone who dares to push the limits of what we think is possible.
It really makes you wonder what truly motivates people to take on such extraordinary risks. Was it fame, glory, a need to prove something to the world? Or was it something deeper, something more personal?
For Mallory, it was probably a mix of all those things. He was a complicated guy shaped by his experiences in war, his deep love for the mountains, and his desire to leave his mark on the world. He actually famously wrote, "Why did I want to climb Mount Everest? Because it's there." It's such a simple statement, but it really captures that spirit of exploration, that innate human urge to conquer the unknown.
There's a raw honesty to that statement, isn't there? It's not about awards or recognition. It's about the challenge itself, the sheer audacity of attempting something that most people would consider impossible.
Exactly. And I think that's what continues to draw people to the story of Mallory and Irvine. It's a story about the triumph of the human spirit, even in the face of, overwhelming odds. It's a story that reminds us that there are still mysteries out there waiting to be uncovered.
And maybe some mysteries are better left unsolved.
Yeah.
The not knowing the endless possibilities.
Mhm.
It keeps their story alive in a way.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's a certain beauty in the ambiguity. In the space, it allows for imagination and speculation, and maybe in the end, the most important thing isn't whether or not they reach the summit, but the spirit in which they attempted it. Their courage, their determination, their unwavering belief in what humans can achieve. That's the true legacy of Mallory and Irvine.
And it's a legacy that continues to inspire climbers and adventurers even to this day. Every time someone sets foot on Everest, they're walking in the footsteps of those pioneers, carrying their spirit with them.
Yeah, their story reminds us that we're all capable of extraordinary things if we just dare to dream big and push our limits. It's a story that speaks to that explorer within us all, that part that yearns to discover, to challenge, to overcome.
So for all of you listening out there, we'll leave you with this question. What mountains are you climbing in your own life? What challenges are you facing? And what keeps you pushing forward? The story of Mallory and Irvine is a testament to the power of the human spirit. A reminder that even when faced with the unknown, we can achieve incredible things. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the mystery of Mallory and Irvine. We'll be back next week with another fascinating story from history.